Hello and welcome to Kidville on May 6th of 2020. Pastor Matt is here with Vanessa.
Hi.
Vanessa, do you have anything to say to everybody?
Hi.
She just wants to say hello, and we miss you all. Wish that you could all be here, but it's not safe. So I'm thankful that you have come to join me today, Vanessa. Just wanted to let you know that on Friday between 3 and 4 o'clock, we're encouraging families from the church to drive through our parking lot over here, and we're going to be handing out some supplies for crafts for children's church over the next several weeks, because it looks like it's going to be at least another several weeks before we're able to meet again. And we have a special Mother's Day craft for you to do. Don't tell your parents, all right? But you can come on Friday between 3 and 4 and pick up the stuff to make a craft, a Mother's Day gift for you to give your mom or grandma or aunt or whoever you want to give it to. And so we're going to have that. We're going to have other things. We've got some food from different things. And then we're going to be praying with the cars too as people come by. But what do you think people need to do when they come? Because it's just a drive through. So what do they need to do?
You should wear gloves.
Gloves, maybe a mask.
A mask.
And stay
6 feet apart.
6 feet apart. Stay in your car, okay? So you're going to stay in the car, but we'll be there and be praying with you and for you and passing out some things. So just want to let you know about that on Friday. And then also on Thursday night at 7 o'clock, we're going to do another Zoom talk where we get on and share some things and talk with each other and just be able to connect. So that's with your whole family, that if you want to get them to do that. So with that, we'll go ahead and move on to our Kidville call for the night. So thank you, Vanessa, for helping with this. You ready? All right. God is
love,
and He
loves us.
He sent
Jesus,
to live,
and to teach,
to die.
and to be resurrected.
God wants to.
Rescue us.
He loves us.
So we love others.
God sent Jesus
And He sends us
to live,
and to teach,
to love,
and to lead.
and all God's children said,
Amen.
Amen. All right. Good stuff. Way to go. I would give you a high five. I almost reached over to give you a high five, but we're not supposed to do that. So today, just one other reminder for you is that if you have any questions for me, go ahead and send those in through, you can send it through Facebook, through an email, and text it. Vanessa sent me a question a couple weeks ago that I answered, and she sent that through email. We've sent email back and forth a couple times, actually. And so if you just want to talk to me or to Ilcia or Luis, who also help out on Wednesday nights, go ahead and contact us. We'd love to be in touch with you and talk with you. So with that, we're going to welcome you to that Ask Pastor Matt series where you guys ask questions to me and I try and answer them. And this special episode, obviously Vanessa's here, and we were talking just a little bit ago, and she loves the story of Esther. And so we're going to talk about Esther. I'm going to teach the story, and then Vanessa's going to ask some questions. We're going to talk about it as if we do every Wednesday night. So the story of Esther takes place in the Old Testament, and the Jewish people have been carried off to a foreign land, and they don't really have their freedom anymore, but they serve a king called Artaxerxes. That's kind of a mouthful to say, isn't it? So Artaxerxes is the king, and he has a very beautiful wife named Vashti. And he's been throwing this big party. It's been going on for a long time. And the king has been enjoying himself too much. And the king has been having this party with a bunch of his guy friends. And the queen has been having her party with her lady friends. And the king wants to impress all the other guys by how beautiful his wife is. So he calls for her to come and kind of walk around and show how beautiful she is. What do you think? Vashti really wanted to walk around in front of a bunch of guys? No, she didn't want to do that, so she actually refused to do that. Which today, you know, like husband and wife don't always agree on things, but back then, for the queen to ignore an order from the king was not a good idea. And so when she refused, the king got embarrassed, and he asked all of his friends, well, what should I do? And all of his friends didn't want their wives to be able to tell them no and get away with it. They wanted to be in charge of their wives. That's not really a good marriage, is it? No, like that, yeah. So, but that's how it was then. And so the men said, well, you have to punish her. Like, she shouldn't even get to be queen anymore. So you got to just throw her out on the streets, get rid of her, and be done with her. And then our wives will respect us. And so that's what they recommend to the king. And the king says, okay. And he does that and takes away Vashti. But he's kind of sad because he doesn't have his wife anymore. So to cheer him up, the guys who are running the country with the king recommend, say, hey, why don't you just have a beauty contest and then pick the most beautiful woman in all the land, right? Like, because that's clearly all the king really cared about was how beautiful his wife was. And so that's, again, not a good way to build a marriage, but that's another lesson for another day, right? And so he has this beauty contest, and there's this woman named Esther. And Esther is a Jewish person, and she has been brought into captivity, and she's there to serve the country. And her parents had passed away, which is really sad. But she has a really great guy as an uncle. His name is Mordecai. And Mordecai kind of adopts her and raises her. And Mordecai, as you'll find out, is a really, really good guy. And he takes care of Esther and raises her. And everybody notices how beautiful Esther is. So Esther goes and she's put into this beauty contest. We don't know that she chose to do it or if they kind of made her do it. But anyway, she's in this contest. And do you know what they had to do to prepare? Vanessa, do you remember from the story? No. She had to spend a whole year getting beauty treatments. Isn't that crazy? So she spent a whole year, and all she did was get beauty treatments to make her even more beautiful on the outside. Now listen, if any guy ever tells you that you need to get beauty treatments, you need to just tell him to take a hike. You got that? All you girls out there, when you're old enough to worry about boys, which none of you are, you can just tell them to take a hike if anybody ever tells you that. And so, but she went through with all this for a whole year. She does these beauty treatments. And then they finally have this contest. And it says that Esther finds great favor in the king's eyes. And so that he chooses Esther out of all these other women to be his new wife. So she becomes the queen of the whole land. That's pretty cool, right? And so Esther becomes the queen, and Mordecai, her uncle, would just go hang out by the gates of the palace, by the city gates, and he just kind of listen to what's going on. And one time he found out that there was these two guys that were going to try and kill the king. And so he reports it to some people that reported to Esther, and Esther goes to the king and says, hey, my uncle told me there's two guys trying to kill you. Well, they find out about the plan, and the king is saved. And so the king is really happy about that, obviously, but he doesn't ever reward Mordecai. And so, which is kind of weird. I guess he just forgot. He may have been stressed out. People were trying to kill him. And so what happens is that just kind of goes away. Well, another man named Haman, and every time you hear the word Haman, you can do it like this, okay? Because Haman's the bad guy of the story. Boo. Okay? So Haman, boo, he becomes the second most important person in all the land. He gets promoted during this time. And everybody's supposed to bow down to him. Yeah, that's a bad idea. And so they're all supposed to bow down to Haman, but Mordecai refuses to do it. And so every time Haman comes through, everybody else bows down, but Mordecai just kind of stands there. He's like, I'm not bowing down to this guy. And Haman gets really, really mad. Well, up to this point, nobody recognized or knew that Mordecai and Esther were Jewish people. Nobody knew. They kind of kept that hidden because the people didn't like the Jewish people. But Haman somehow finds out that Mordecai is Jewish, so he creates this whole plan to just get rid of all the Jewish people. It's kind of, it's a really mean plan. And so Haman goes to the king, and he pays the king 10,000 pieces of silver. That's a lot of money, right? The king has lots of money, but that's a lot of money. And he says, hey, if I give you this silver, all this money, will you do me a favor? And the king kind of agrees to it and says, yeah, sure. Like, and what's the favor? And the favor is, well, I want you to pick a day, and on that day I want you to say it's okay for everybody to attack all the Jewish people in all of the kingdom. Yeah, bad idea there. And so the king agrees to it because he just wants the money, and he doesn't care who these people are because, again, he doesn't think he knows any of these people. He doesn't even know his queen is a Jewish person. And so he allows this to happen. Well, Mordecai finds out and immediately gets mad. It says he rips his clothes and he puts on sackcloth and ashes and he begins fasting and praying. So he stops eating, he starts praying, and all the Jewish people all over the kingdom, they do the same thing. They stop eating food and they start praying all the time, and they're just begging God to show up and saying, please rescue us from this. But the thing about it was, back then, when the king made a decision like this, and he called it an edict, when he made a law or declared something to happen, he wasn't allowed to change his mind. So I don't really, anyway. So Haman gets, yeah, exactly. Haman gets this law passed through the king, and Mordecai is finally able to communicate with the queen. The queen doesn't even know what's going on because she's in the castle and she's kind of, insulated from all this. And so he tells her what's going on, and she's like, well, what do you want me to do about it? And he says, you need to go to the king and you need to tell him to get this to stop, that you are a Jewish person, that I'm a Jewish, that the Jewish people are not attacking him. So don't attack us. Well, Esther says, well, I can't go in front of the king. Because even though she was the queen, she wasn't allowed to go visit the king. Isn't that weird? That is so bizarre. I cannot imagine if my wife was not able to come. Can you imagine if Pastor Emily was not able to come into my presence unless I called for her? That wouldn't work, would it? That'd be terrible. Yeah. So I am not proposing that if Pastor Emily's watching this. And so so she said, I can't even go. You're getting called for me in 30 days. And he says, well, if you don't do this, Mordecai tells Esther, if you don't do this, he's going to find some other way to rescue us. Don't you want to be the one who helps rescue us? And then he says something where he says, and besides, don't you think God has put you in this position as the queen in order to help us in this time? Don't you think God orchestrated all of that for you to become the queen because he knew that you needed to be there? And she finally says, okay, here's the deal. 3 days. Everybody fast, everybody pray. You get everybody to do it. I'll do it here with all of my people, and we will fast and we'll pray, and then I'll go before the king, and if he puts out his scepter, the staff that he carries, extends it to her, she's safe, and she'll be all right. Otherwise, she's off with her head. And so they go. They go for 3 days. They're fasting, they're praying, and Esther finally goes in front of the king, and the king says, oh. And he extends the scepter. He says, Esther, what is it you want? I'll give you half my kingdom. What is it you want? And she says, I just want you and your friend Haman to come over to my house. I've prepared a feast. I thought she was going to ask about the rule and help her people out. But she invites him to a meal. So she must have some plan, right? So they come to the feast. Haman goes with the king, and it's just the king, Haman, and Esther, and it's just them, and this huge feast and all this food. And they eat that, and so the king says, okay, Esther, what is it? What do you want? Up to half my kingdom. You can have it. Just ask. And she says, well, how about if you guys come to my house again tomorrow for another feast, just the two of you. And then I will ask you what it is, if I found favor in your eyes. And he says, okay, sure, I'll come back and have another feast tomorrow. That sounds good. The king likes to eat. And so he leaves, and Haman leaves, and Haman's strutting around, and he goes back to his house. He's talking to his family, and everybody knows, he's like, oh, I'm so important because the queen had me come over. It's just me and the queen and the king, and we're all hanging out. And it went so well, and they love me so much that we're going to do it again tomorrow. And he's all excited, and they say, hey, you should take care of Mordecai and have the king, if the king loves you so much, you should have Mordecai wiped off the face of the earth. And he goes, oh yeah, I'll go ask him tomorrow, because obviously the king and the queen love me. I'm getting these special feasts. So then the next day comes, and Haman goes to see the king because he's getting ready to go to the feast again, right? And I imagine him like strutting in, like I'm the man. And the king, though, the night before couldn't sleep. He could, yeah, that's right. There's a twist in the story. I almost forgot it. And so the king couldn't sleep the night before. And so he called for his royal records. And he gets his royal records and he's looking through them. And he reads the record of when Mordecai saved his life. You remember that? How I told you about that? And he said, he calls the people like, what happened? What did I do to thank this man for rescuing my life? And they said, well, you didn't really do anything. I don't know if you forgot, but there's nothing in the records where you rewarded him or anything. So the king's trying to figure this out, what he's going to do. And about that time, Haman comes walking in. And Haman, again, he's strutting and he's feeling good and he's thinking everybody loves me and the king loves me and the queen loves me. And the king just asks him, he says, Haman, I got a question for you. What should the king do to somebody, for somebody, to reward somebody that he loves very much? And Haman in his mind thinks, the king's asking me what he should do for me because he loves me so much. And he's thinking, oh, I can ask for anything and the king's going to do it. And so Haman says, well, king, if I was you, here's what I would do. I would get some royal clothing, the royal robes, and I would get those that you've worn, and I would give them to this man. And I would put a crown on his head, and then I'd go get your own personal horse, and I'd bring it in and give it to him. And I'd put that man on the horse with the robe, with the crown, and I would walk him around the city and tell everybody this is what happens when the king loves somebody. He does this. He shows everybody that they're so close to the king. And Haman is sitting there, he recommends this, and he's sitting there, I imagine he's thinking like, and now the king's going to say, all right, Haman, this is what's going to happen to you. But you know what he did? He told Haman, and Haman hates Mordecai, remember? And so he hates Mordecai so much that he wanted to have Mordecai and all his people killed. And he says, okay, Haman, I want you to do that for Mordecai. I want you to put a robe on him, put a crown on him, put him on my horse and walk him around, and I want you to tell everybody that I love Mordecai. Well, you think Haman liked that? No, not at all. But do you think he did it? Yeah, because he didn't want to get on the king's bad side, so he had to do it. And so they go and he does this, and then they go back. It's the second day for the second feast right after this. So Haman and the king and the queen get together for the second feast. And the king says, oh, Queen Esther, what is it that I can do for you? And she says, well, you can take away that order that you made that was going to kill all of my people and me. And he says, what? I never issued an order for you to die. And the queen says, well, this man Haman tricked you into doing it. And the king is very angry. And he goes out and it says he's like steaming. He doesn't know what to do because he can't stop this order. He's not allowed to stop it. And so he comes back in and he has Haman taken away, and we never hear about Haman again. And he can't change the order, but he does make an order, a new order. It says that the Jewish people are allowed to defend themselves on this day. And so what happens is the Jewish people defend themselves on that day. The Jewish people are safe, and Esther stays queen. And eventually, Mordecai gets Haman's position as second in charge. So we see justice kind of come about in that way. So that's the story of Esther. Let me ask you this. I know you've got some questions for me. Let me ask you, what do you think is the main point of the story? One or two main points of the story. You have any idea?
Not really.
Not really?
It's a mix of stuff.
It's a mix of stuff? Yeah. So I think one of the things is that when God's people are in trouble, there's really only one thing to do. Do you remember what they did when they found out they were in trouble? They stopped what they were doing, and they fasted, and you remember?
Prayed.
And they prayed, that's right. And so when God's people are in trouble, they need to stop, and they need to fast, and they need to pray and ask God, like, please come help us. But then also I think another main thing is that God puts his people in very interesting places and positions. And so I don't think it's a coincidence that Esther became the queen. I think God did put her in that place so that she would be in a place where she could contact the king and help her people out. And God does that with people all the time. So I think those are the main lessons. What questions do you have for me about the story?
There's a couple questions, but why didn't Vashti want to come into the party?
So why didn't Vashti want to come into the party? I think Vashti did not want to be paraded around in front of a bunch of men who were not acting well at that point. I think she felt degraded and unvalued for who she was, but only for what she looked like. And I think she was tired of it. So that would be my guess.
What did the king do to find a new queen?
So the king basically put on a beauty pageant. And he had the women walk around in front and they got all those beauty treatments. But even in that, I think when people are, like she was being prepared in this way. I think when God puts somebody in a position, he often will do things to prepare them for that moment that he needs them to be ready. And so in this case, it looked like beauty treatments, but in other cases, it might look different.
Okay. How could Esther visit the king?
How could Esther? So Esther had to have a lot of courage to visit the king because she had to wait to be invited, or she had to go, and if she went and just showed up, people who just showed up in front of the king could be put to death. It was seen as, I don't know, but it was that was just the system that they were in. So it took her a lot of courage in order to visit the king.
Let's see. How did Mordecai save the king's life?
So Mordecai saved the king's life by just listening to what was going on in the city. And when he heard about something that was bad that was going to happen, he let Queen Esther know so that she could let the king know. And so I think an important lesson from that is that when we hear of people wanting to do bad things or to harm people, we should do what we need to do in order to keep that from happening.
Let's see. Why didn't Mordecai bow down to Haman?
So I don't know exactly why Mordecai didn't bow down to Haman. There are stories in the Bible of people refusing to bow down to anybody except for God. And so I don't recall that there is a specific reason. I don't know if Mordecai knew that Haman was a bad person or if he was just making a general stand and saying, I'm only going to worship God and I'm not going to worship another person. Yeah.
What did the king offer to Esther?
The king offered Esther half of his kingdom a couple of times. He said, up to half my kingdom. So like she could have said, okay, I want the western half of your kingdom, and he theoretically would have given it. I think that was just kind of his way of saying, whatever you want, I'll be glad to give you. I don't think he really was going to give her half the kingdom.
What happened to Haman?
So what happened to Haman? Haman died in the end of the story. He was trying to kill people and he ended up dying himself. Yeah, there's no way to smooth over that. You got one more?
What is Purim?
So Purim is a festival that Jewish people celebrate. So there was a specific day that people were allowed to attack them, and then the second order was that they could defend themselves on that day. It's actually 2 days that happened, the 13th and 14th of some month. And they were told, or they basically celebrate that as a day that God delivered them from this attack. And so they celebrate it with a feast. So I guess the story starts with a feast and ends with a feast, which, what do you think that means? I think it's good to feast. So is there anything else that you want to ask about the story that you thought of? Nope. Is there anything, what's been your favorite thing about kind of this COVID-19 break? Has there been anything good that's happened during this time? No? Nothing?
Just sleeping in.
Sleeping in. Yes, I think lots of our friends out there have been enjoying sleeping in. So kids, that's it for the lesson for tonight. I want to encourage you, make sure you stay focused on your schoolwork. You're almost done. We got about a month left of school. You guys can do this. Focus on what you're learning, what your teachers are trying to teach you, and be good for your parents as well. And again, remember, Thursday night, 7 o'clock, we've got a Zoom conversation if your family wants to join us. And between 3 and 4, we're having a drive-through for families to come and drive through the parking lot. And we've got some stuff for you and just a chance for us to pray with you as well. So, all right, go and be good. Have a good night.